I've always thought of these monthly wrap-ups as kind of a fireside chat, but I don't really have a fire, so my laptop will have to do. Interesting fact, this thing behind me is what's called in Germany a Kachelofen, which means a tiled oven. This is a coal heater, basically, which is how my flat used to be heated. Welcome to Madame Books, where I talk about fantasy mostly, science fiction sometimes, and comics occasionally. December was a really nice month for reading. I didn't read a huge amount compared to some booktubers I know, but the stuff I read, except for one exception, maybe sort of 1.5, was really good. So let's get into it. If you're a friend of the channel, you already know that I've been rereading The Lord of the Rings, and in December I read The Fellowship of the Ring. I put up a couple of vlogs about it. I tabbed the hell out of the book, and I've really been enjoying it. This was partially for me a test in a way. Is my love of Lord of the Rings primarily nostalgia, or do I still find it actually just a qualitatively extremely good book? And yes, I do. I have been very conscious of my nostalgia. I've read it many times since I was 9 years old, and it's still really good. I've greatly been enjoying this. I will be starting The Two Towers in January. I'll be vlogging that as well. Next, I read Elric of Melniboné. Not this whole book. This is a bind-up of numerous Elric novels. The Elric novels are 100-something pages each, so they're all pretty thin. I just read the first one. This is a reread for me. I read these back when I was a teenager. I think I read them again in my early 30s. They're such foundational fantasy literature. It's almost impossible not to see millions of places where they have influenced and inspired other fantasy authors, also in television, and I really enjoyed it. It's a great palate cleanser. I've said this before about Amber, The Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny. I will be sort of inserting these between other chunky, challenging books that I'm reading because they're easy to read. They're sword and sorcery, even if it's pretty grimdark sword and sorcery, so they make a perfect break between other things. I really enjoyed it. I did a review, so go and look at that if you're interested. A not fantasy, not science fiction, not comics entry into my monthly wrap-up, and I've been thinking about this. Just a little digression. I've been looking at people like my friend Josh at Red Fury Books, and also Jimmy Nuts, and other booktubers who are reading a lot more diversely than they used to. So not just all fantasy, not just all science fiction or whatever. Reading this made me miss some contemporary fiction, which I used to read a lot more of. This is Paul Auster's Moon Palace. Paul Auster is probably my favorite author of all time. I've read almost all of his books. He's a really interesting author. He's been called the greatest postmodern American novelist. And this, Moon Palace, at least from my perspective, is his best novel. It's a story, like most Paul Auster stories, of strange coincidences, of a person on the edge of society, or at least moving from inside society to the edge, or even a little bit outside it. It's a young man who pretty much loses everything he has, including his mind, and goes through a lot of stuff. And it only really covers a year in his life. It's told first person by the main character, M.S. Fogg. He goes through a hell of a lot of stuff, and it's fascinating. It's really interesting to me to get into the head of someone that ends up so on the edge of society in a not what we would consider normal kind of position in his life. I love this book. This is probably the 4th time I've read it. It's an easy read. It's 200-something pages, so it's a pretty quick and easy read. I'm going to be sticking Paul Auster and other authors also in between things, and with those authors and Elric of Melniboné books and Chronicle of Amber books, the in-between chunky books is starting to look pretty chunky. I have a complicated relationship with manga. I love comics. I grew up on comics, and at some point I transitioned away mostly from relatively immature and simplistic superhero comics to slightly more mature and involved kind of comics. But I still read comics. I've read comics almost all my life, and mostly Western ones. So there's a huge trend on BookTube right now. Lots of my Western BookTube friends are reading manga. Lots of people are reading Berserk and One Piece and whatever. I have a problem with manga in that the over-the-top facial expressions, the kind of over-the-top weird comic relief moments, the characters that obviously exist only to be comic relief, that are really, really cartoony in an otherwise pretty realistic comic, it's just not my thing. No problem if you love it. A lot of people love manga, and that's great, but just not for me. However, I remembered a comic I actually read many years ago, or at least read some of many years ago, Lone Wolf and Cub. I read these in the 90s. They've got gorgeous covers by Frank Miller, but the art inside is not Frank Miller at all. You can see an example. They don't have the over-top facial expressions. They don't have the ridiculous comic relief moments. They're pretty straightforward and serious in their presentation. It all takes place in Edo, Japan. I've heard, I'm not in any way an expert on Edo, Japan, but I've heard that it's a pretty historically accurate rendition of the time. The main character is a ronin, so a samurai without a master, and he hires himself out as an assassin. The twist, or the weirdness about that, is that he's also got a baby carriage and his 2 or 3 year old son that he is pushing around Edo, Japan, as he's brutally murdering people. If you've ever wondered where The Mandalorian came from, by the way, it's told in a very episodic way. So each short story, which can be maybe 15 or 20 pages, is him murdering someone. He's been hired to assassinate someone, and it shows you how he gets close to the target, how he tricks people, how he works his way up to actually doing the assassination. As it's going, there's a lot of political information about the state of Edo, Japan, about the wars between the different lords of the different areas and their relation to the shogun and all of that kind of thing. If you're into James Clavell's Shogun, you might really enjoy this because it's set in the period that Shogun is happening in, pretty much, and I'm loving it. To start with, the episodic nature of it, there is no real continuing through story. We get a little bit of backstory on him and how he sort of started on this path, but mostly it's just these little assassination episodes, so to speak. There is a more in-depth sort of continuing story that develops later. I've already bought the second and third omnibus, so I am definitely planning on continuing A Lone Wolf and Cub. A manga that hasn't been quite as successful, Attack on Titan. Because of my weird taste or my dislike for a lot of aspects of manga, a friend of mine recommended this and said that it doesn't have that much of that. More or less right, but it also doesn't have much of a story so far. This is a monster omnibus with volume 1, 2, and 3 in it. The basic idea is that it's on Earth, probably, I think, future Earth, and these huge, kind of horrific versions of humans, they're like many meters tall, much bigger than humans, but they're basically bipedal humanoid creatures. They eat humans. And humanity has more or less pulled itself back into a city which has huge walls and three layers of defense, so 3 rings of walls. And right at the beginning, this guy, who is a Colossus Titan, who is tall enough to look over the walls, destroys, or at least kicks a hole in one of the walls, and lets the other Titans in. That, to me, was a really interesting start. where I was thinking, okay, this could be going really interesting places. Since the beginning, since that introduction of sort of this is the world we're in, mostly what it's been is a bunch of young people who are in this elite Titan fighting force yelling a lot and fighting Titans, mostly unsuccessfully. And it's a bit thin, to be honest. I'm hoping that at some point there is more story. I am that far through, so about 2/3 through it. So far, I'm not really super hooked. I already bought the next omnibus, so volumes 4, 5, and 6. So I will continue at least that long, but I'm hoping that there's more, because so far it's interesting up to a point and it's starting to get boring. Sorry, Attack on Titan. Last but not least, I started Fool's Fate. I won't say too much about it right now. It's Robin Hobb, one of my all-time favorite fantasy authors, the best fantasy character writer, in my opinion. This is the third book in one of her trilogies. She has a series called The Realm of the Elderlings. It's 16 books split up into 3 trilogies and 1 tetralogy. This is the third trilogy and the third book of that trilogy. So I just finished the 20-man trilogy. If you've read these and you're a fan of Hobb, you can imagine the emotional state this put me in. But in December, I did not finish this. I just started it. So I'll talk more about it in January, where it belongs. I said last but not least, but that was slightly incorrect, because the actual last was a bit forgettable. I don't like it when I notice that I am judging something without giving it a chance, or when I have a strong opinion about something that I don't really know anything about because I have no experience with it. When I noticed myself sneering every time someone said lit RPG, I thought, you know, I should try at least some and see what I think. Maybe I'm actually making a mistaken assumption and missing out on good books. Everyone's been talking about Dungeon Crawler Carl, so I grabbed the audiobook on Audible, and at the beginning I thought, okay, this is a little bit like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's very tongue-in-cheek, there's a lot of humor. It was pretty good humor. I found myself laughing out loud a couple of times. That's the setup period of the book. The setup being aliens come to Earth. They, for reasons, destroy everything, flatten all of the buildings on the entire planet at once, killing almost everyone on the Earth. Anyone who's outdoors survives, and the aliens, because reasons, have created a dungeon, and they want everybody on Earth to enter it and compete to clear the dungeon. All of this, it's pretty absurd, but it's kind of a comedy. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'm kind of enjoying this. I'm skeptically pleasantly surprised. And then once the main character, Carl, enters the dungeon, he is in a video game, but he's in a physical video game, but he sees in his mind the interface of a video game. And from then on, it basically becomes a description in text of playing a dungeon crawler video game. It's on the cover. I shouldn't have been surprised. I wasn't surprised, but I was bored. I don't know why anyone would want to read a description of playing a video game instead of just playing a video game. I certainly would rather play a video game than read about one. So I DNF'd this about a third of the way in because it made me want to play video games, but it didn't make me want to keep reading. Sorry, Kyle. And I want to start consciously thinking about, so that at the end of the year I have a list of 12 books that are really good. I want to start consciously thinking about what was the best book I read this month. The book of the month, if you couldn't guess it already from what I already said, the book of the month for December 2023 is Moon Palace, for sure. Such a good book. I will be doing a review on it. I look forward to introducing more people to Paul Auster. I think probably a lot of people who read fantasy and science fiction have maybe never heard of him, certainly never read anything by him, and that is an error. Just briefly, a little bit about the channel. I am creeping up on 1,800 subscribers, which is nice. So 2,000 can't be too far off. I didn't put out too many videos in December. December is one of those months. It was, for me personally, it was an interesting month because I quit my job and had my last day in December with all of the emotional stuff and life change stuff that has to do with that. Because of that, maybe I didn't put out that many videos, but I did stick to my plan to do at least one video a week. I put out the Lord of the Rings vlogs, and they were remarkably unsuccessful, which is fine. I had a good time doing them, but it kind of confuses me considering how remarkably successful the Lord of the Rings editions video has been. I'm getting the feeling that people are really interested in buying fancy editions of Lord of the Rings, but are not very interested in actually reading it. I hosted an awesome chat, and this is something I want to do after each of the books of Lord of the Rings, is a chat with Mike from Mike's Book Reviews, AP Canavan from A Critical Dragon, and Philip Chase, Dr. Fantasy himself. The four of us had an excellent chat. I so enjoyed it. I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it. It seems to have been quite popular, which makes me feel really good because this is exactly the kind of thing I love doing. Chatting about Lord of the Rings is a perfect pastime. The Sunday pub in December was very successful. In fact, it was more successful than I expected. It turned out that Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve were both on a Sunday. So they were Sunday pub days, and I didn't really have any plans. I don't really have any family in Germany. A lot of my friends do have family, so they were all busy. So I thought, Christmas Eve, I'm gonna do Sunday pub. And then again, New Year's Eve, I'm gonna do Sunday pub. And I did, with the conscious plan beforehand to sit there by myself, because that's what I kind of expected I would be doing. And they were the liveliest, fullest, longest Sunday pubs that I've ever had so far. So thank you all for having as little planned on those days as I did, and for joining me, because it was an absolutely excellent way to spend Christmas and New Year's Eve. And just quickly a reminder, coming up January 13th, Friends on Books with Jimmy Nuts, Alan from the Library of Alexandria, and Brian from Belltube. It's going to be, I kind of assume, chaotic fun. Be there. And part of the monthly wrap-up that you've actually all been waiting for, some Fitz. Fitz has settled in pretty well. We were doing really, really well and just enjoying being in the flat together until recently when she decided that peeing on my bed was a good idea again. We had that problem when she first moved in, and it lasted a few weeks and stopped. And I was super happy because I got tired of washing my sheets every day or two. Unfortunately, it started again, so she's locked out of the bedroom, which means she sits in the hallway and screams, and I wake up at really weird hours, and I haven't really been sleeping nearly enough. But I'm still loving having her here. It's a damn good thing that she's so cute. Otherwise, I probably would have strangled her recently. I watched some awesome things in December and also played some pretty cool but not amazing blow me away kind of games. The Dune 2 trailer came out. If you know me, you know that the first Dune movie, I've watched it a number of times. I'm not sure how many. It's so good. And I am so looking forward to the Dune 2 movie. The only thing I would really criticize heavily in the first movie is that it just sort of ends where it ends because it's planned on being two movies. The second one coming out, the trailer looks awesome. I am so excited. It can happen today as far as I'm concerned. As far as series go, I've been watching pretty regularly every week Slow Horses and For All Mankind, both on Apple TV. Apple TV has been kicking ass lately. They've been doing really, really good shit. Slow Horses, if you don't know it, is kind of a spy thriller kind of series, but it's dealing with the loser office of the MI5. So all of the losers get sent to this special department, and the boss of the department is Gary Oldman, who plays a slovenly, alcoholic, rundown super spy extremely well. It's such a good show. I've been enjoying it so much. For All Mankind is an alternate history of what would have happened if NASA hadn't gotten defunded, if the interest in general of the space race hadn't fallen off, if we had kept pushing and going to space. So in this alternate history, there is a base built on the moon. Humanity makes it to Mars. Technology for space keeps developing. It's got some great acting, some really, really interesting stories. It's very American-centric, which isn't for everyone, but I am really, really enjoying it. Games, I played a few, and all of them were fun, but none of them really hooked me. I played Dune Spice Wars, which is sort of a 4X game where you're exploring Arrakis. It's set in the world of the Dune books. You're exploring, you're looking for resources, you're building, you're developing troops, you're going out and fighting other groups of people and taking their shit. It was fun, but it didn't grab me enough that I really got into it and kept playing it very long. Another one came from some friends of mine, hi Nico and Dania, who I play online with pretty regularly. They have been playing for a long time a game called SnowRunner, which is literally driving a truck. That's the game. You drive a truck and deliver stuff. And the thing that makes it interesting is you're doing that in difficult terrain. You're going through mud, you're going through snow, you're having to cross rivers and that kind of stuff. And you've got to it's more of a, in a way, it's more of a puzzle game. You have to figure out the right combination of tires and suspension and engine and which truck to take and which gear you put on the back of the truck and that kind of stuff to be able to make the delivery that you need to in the right way, in the right time, that kind of thing. It was fun. It was another one of those things where I was kind of looking down my nose at it. I thought, how boring could that be? I mean, like, that sounds absolutely tedious, driving a truck around. And I eventually realized that I was just judging something that I knew nothing about. So I thought, oh, I'll give it a try. And it was actually quite a bit of fun. Again, not a big hook, didn't last very long, played it on and off for about a week, but now I can say it is actually quite fun. And maybe the clumsiest name for a video game of anything I've ever played, Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord, which luckily everyone just calls Bannerlord, is kind of a medieval game that's covering everything. It's really strange. It's from a pretty small studio, and it's doing what a lot of different games do all in one game. So it's kind of an RPG, but it's also kind of a tactical thing. And it's also kind of a strategic, politicky, intriguey kind of thing. It's got so much going on in it. It's got a steep learning curve to really get into it. But once you get it, it becomes actually quite fun. You hit a point where it's like, okay, now you've got all sorts of political connections and you're establishing a family, a dynasty for yourself, and you've got a pretty big army and you're getting involved in these epic wars. And it turned out to be really fun, but again, not really such a huge hook. Yeah, that was my December. How was your December? How have you been enjoying what you've been reading? How have you been enjoying what you've been watching and playing if you're a gamer? I'd love to hear it down in the comments. I hope you're reading awesome books. I hope you had an excellent December and holiday season and you entered the new year in the right way, whatever that means for you. And I'll see you next time.